Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast. I am joining you from really one of the most beautiful days of the year. It's supposed to be around 80 today, sunny and gorgeous. It's been a little warm the last couple of days, but still haven't had any hundreds. I think we got 98 yesterday here, which is the closest it's gotten. But we've had a lovely moderate spring so far. Vineyard looks amazing, and things are great. My guest this week is going to be one of my own icons in the world of wine, Steve Edmunds of Edmunds St. John Winery, and I have the honor of emceeing his award ceremony coming up in a couple of weeks, where he is going to be the Rhone Rangers Lifetime Achievement Award winner. So I can't wait to talk to Steve. It'll be great. He's one of my favorites in the world of wine. But while we wait for people to join, as usual, I will share a few pictures of what's going on here at the vineyard and the winery. So out in the vineyard itself, we are still kind of living with a little bit of extra scruffiness because of the rain we got last winter. You can see kind of the mown. It's been grazed 3 times and mown twice, but it keeps growing, cover crop in that left-hand row. We are going through and trying to make sure that we have the right amount of shoots. We're doing some shoot thinning, so you can see in this Syrah block some of the canes that we have thinned out. We're also tucking the canes that remain up into the wires to allow the passage of light and air. We are monitoring how the block that we grafted over to Viognier is going. Here's a little overview look. It looks really good. This was a small Pinot Noir section that we had there really to produce vines for the property that my wife and I now live on, that my dad planted, which is the home of our full circle Pinot Noir. A close-up of how that works. We cut the tops off of those trunks and grafted on a couple of Viognier buds. You can see those buds already sprouted. Some of them are even producing clusters, that we're not going to allow them to do so. And then one more, really close-up, you can see that bud's really it's powered by the root system of this larger vine, and should be up on the wires this year and hopefully producing next year. What else do we have going on? That's kind of it for the vineyard. Oh, wait, a couple more photos. We have seen fruit set. So this is Syrah. You can see the little tiny grapes, kind of smaller than pea-sized, but getting there. We're just about through flowering. That's Syrah. Picture of Grenache also that'll give you a sense of where the different grapes are. So just about done with flowering, on to the next stage, and don't look like we had a lot of shatter or anything else, so conditions are looking good. Finally, in the cellar, we have been working on blending. If you are interested in a deep dive on how our red blending from 2023 vintage went, that's the subject of my blog this week. Those are some of my tasting notes. Here are some of the bottles that we made. Made 18 different red wines, including a couple of Sierra Foothills wines that I'm excited to talk to Steve about. And then finally, we will be bottling next week. So if you have been desperately waiting for whites like Grenache Blanc or Viognier or Côte Tablas Blanc or Marsanne or things like that, I know we have been super scarce on whites. That will all get better next week. So keep an eye on your emails and on social media, and we'll be announcing them soon. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to invite Steve to join me, and we will go from there. Okay. I don't see him there, so let me send an invitation out. Send this to account. So I just sent him an invitation, and hopefully he will be on shortly. He's joining from his daughter's house in North Carolina. Hey, there we go. How are you, Steve?
Good. I thought I had done something wrong. I was on early, and I've wondered what happened.
Not at all. Nothing wrong. You look good, crisp and clear, and I can hear you well.
Good.
So
Okay.
our tests were not in vain.
Good.
Um, so I gave everybody a little introduction. I'm not sure if you heard that,
Nope.
but I like to start by asking people kind of if there was a wine that started their journey into wine. Did you have a wine that you first remember tasting?
Well, there were, I think, 6 or 7 of them. I I was a home brewer when I was 23 or so, um, and at the point at which my first wife became pregnant with our first child, uh, I was I was still making beer at home, and I went to buy supplies one day at the place where we could get stuff to make beer, and also you could buy stuff to make wine. And, and I talked my way into a job because they had a sign in the window saying help wanted full time and part time. And at that moment, I was actually unemployed. And they said, this is great. You know how to make beer, but you're going to have to learn about wine too. And I said, don't worry, I'll take care of that. They could. Um, and and I had a really good friend who drove a delivery truck for an importer and was really into wine. And he offered to set up a tasting for me and teach me what he knew. Um, and I said, that sounds great. And we went to his house on a Saturday night. And he had the company that he worked for distributed Sebastiani. This was in 1972. Um, so he had 3 or 4 different white wines from Sebastiani and a few reds as well. I don't remember the distribution after all this time. And I had never uh, approached wine with very much curiosity because everybody badmouthed it so much back in those days. And so, my habitual approach was, well, I'll put it in my mouth and swallow it. And if it doesn't taste too bad, I'll have a little more. Um, and here were, these wines, none of which were, you know, hopping or anything like that. But each one was distinctly different, both in terms of how it smelled, what the aromatic characteristics were like, what the texture was like when you had the wine in your mouth, how dry it was, how fruity it was, how much tannin there might be, how much acidity, and so forth. And my brain lit up like a pinball machine, and I was on fire just like that. So the best was definitely yet to come. This friend also drove imported wines around to stores, and he got a good discount, if he wanted to buy some of the wines. And he brought a 1966 Chateau Léoville Lascaz to the house one night for dinner. It was a time when Burgundy was really pretty cheap, and so we drank a bunch of good Burgundy. Um, so I just got kind of a little en route to really exploring. Um,
Yeah, no, that's that was really early in the world of California wine. I mean, there was this long, very sleepy period after Prohibition where things were barely growing at all.
yeah,
So, I mean, early '70s was like that was early for California. And am I right that your next step into the world of wine was working in retail?
yeah, yeah.
What was the retail? Where was the shop, and what was the retail world like in that stage?
Well, that company that first hired me, that sold supplies for people making wine and beer at home, they had a handful of stores, and they were expanding at a really scary rate. And among other places, they opened up a store in Sausalito in Marin County, um, in a little shopping center at the north end of Bridgeway, but it was set so far back from the road that nobody knew that it was. Right next to that little shopping center was a Shell station with a car wash. And on the other side of that was a brand new wine and liquor store called Sausalito Cellars. And within a very short time, because nobody ever came into that shop I was in, I would put a sign up on the door and lock the store, go over there and taste wine with those guys, and just learned so much and got totally enthused. And then next thing you know, I had a job there, um, and and the guy who was employed as the wine buyer took a job a few months later with Sonoma Vineyards, doing marketing and sales. So, and I clearly knew more than anybody else in the place about wine. I was just consuming knowledge at a rapid clip. So I became the wine buyer, and I was the timing was very fortunate. I was one of the first people to buy wines from Warren Winiarski, Bernard Porte, Dick Arrowwood, just all kinds of people that were doing great stuff. And, I felt like, man, this is really cool. Um, so I did for a few years, and then some new employees kind of filtered into the store, and there was some political stuff going on, and I got booted out. And I became a tour guide for Mondavi for a
Huh.
year. And then I took over managing wine and liquor store in Berkeley called Jack Wines and Spirits, which was a major store at the time. I did that stuff for kind of a long time. Um, Working for other people, I was good at what I did, so I got put in positions of a lot of responsibility. It did well at all. And,
But you got to taste an amazing collection of wines, I'm sure.
but anyway, after a while, especially I went through a divorce from my first wife, and just really didn't have any money. But I had taken the civil service exam to work as a mailman in the post office, and I got called to duty in the fall of '81, and did that for a few years, and then met Cornelia in '82, and uh, after being with her for a couple of years and moonlight in shops in Marin County, mailman, she said to me one day, "You don't want to be a mailman for the rest of your life, do you?" So we hatched a plan to make a little wine and see if we could get some kind of a toehold in the business, um, and the rest is history.
So this was what, like mid '80s that you started actually making wine?
85, yeah.
Yeah. And what, like, how early in this process did you decide that it was in the Rhone world that you wanted to focus?
Um, when when we decided that this was what we were going to do, I felt like my first task was to, how am I going to make? Uh, and and I had been around long enough in retail uh, and knew enough people. You I can figure out where to find some of the grapes that I would need to make the wines that I would want to make. And I very quickly narrowed it down to, the wines that really moved me were the wines from the Rhone and the wines from Piemonte. And as far as knew, there was no Nebbiolo anywhere in California. There was some Barbera, which was nice. There was not much in the way of Dolcetto. And, no Arnase, no Cortese, none of that. So it kind of fell to the Rhone. And I very quickly was able to find Grenache and Syrah. Um, the actually the day in the spring of 1985, when the decision was made what we were going to try to produce, we lived right around the block from Chez Panisse, and so we went over there for dinner that night, talking to Cornelia while we were waiting for a table. And I said, I think this is what we ought to do. Uh, we can find Syrah, we can find Grenache. If I work at it, I know enough places to look that I think that maybe we can find some old Mourvedre. And they finally called us to our table, and we went upstairs and sat down. And one of the wines that they had on the wine list that was 1983 Syrah from Qupé. And I had not yet met Bob, and didn't really know anything about his winery or where the grapes came from or any of that kind of stuff. But anyway, we ordered a bottle of it, and it came to the table, and I tasted it, and I just went, "We're going to be able to." And it was just such a kind of stirring moment in a way, because I really felt like, oh, this is a sign from God. We're going to be able to pull this off. Um, it ended up being a lot harder than that with the Mourvedre, but it all finally fell into place.
So I love I love the fact that, like, even in that era when there must not have been, I mean, were there even a dozen kind of winemakers focusing on Rhone varieties in California in the mid '80s? Like that you found one of them on the list at Chez Panisse, and that felt like a sign. Can you talk a little bit about what the Rhone community, such as it was like in that kind of mid to late '80s period?
The only ones I was cognizant of at the time were Phelps had started making Syrah back in the 70s. Um, and and of course I discovered that Bob was doing it. It didn't take long to discover that Randall was out there, and I I I, I called Bob and introduced myself, and he was so receptive and so nice. Um, and but let's see. Yeah, I don't know who else there might have been at that moment.
Yeah.
When John Bickstein and I got together a couple of years later to talk about what really initially was talking about my buying, because the Marston Grenache that I got the first couple of years was no longer. They wanted to keep it for themselves. Um, but I said to John, it's becoming apparent that there are more and more people who are working with Rhone grapes. More and more at that point, meaning, as far as I knew, maybe a dozen. Um, uh, After a while, we decided, okay, let's see if we can pull everybody together.
Right.
And figured out there were one or two at that time. So I sent out a letter to all of them, inviting them all to a dinner that we would have at Lalime's
Right.
in late 1987. And none of those 1 or 22 came. It was
That must have been an eclectic group.
Oh yeah,
I just knowing a handful of those characters still, um, the how much discussion was there at that dinner? And I had Bill Easton on recently for a conversation. I know he was one of the ones who was there, but how much interest was there at the time in actually like getting together and doing stuff together, or was this a whole bunch of like individualists
there was
off
a
each scaling their own mountains?
full spectrum. Um, Jim Clennon came with Bob. Jim was Bob's date, uh, and people with strong personalities, a lot of them, and uh, people that played their cards pretty close to the vest. Some of them, and interesting. There was a certain sentiment that evening of, well, I don't do an organization. I just want to, get together and hang out with all these guys. But other people, cooler heads prevailed, I think, and it would be in all of our interests to just a greater level of awareness out there in the world of people that spend their money on wine, of the fact that there's not just Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay and Zinfandel and Sauvignon Blanc, but there's all this other stuff that's really fun. Um, and it really didn't take very long before we had arranged a second event, which was a tasting at Oliveto for primarily the media, but also some wine buyers, people like that. And I don't know if you've heard this story before or not, but there was a guy I knew in the retail business at that time named Mike Higgins, who worked for a very small retail chain in the East Bay primarily, called JV Liquors.
Okay.
And uh, and I ran into him at that store one time, the one on San Pablo Avenue in El Cerrito, and we were talking, and I mentioned what this group of guys had gotten together to talk about, and he very quickly said, "Oh, you guys should call yourselves the Rhone Rangers." And I, that is a great idea. And I said, "Mike, that's brilliant." So next thing I know, I'm, on the handle for some reason. And that, and the next or seeing of Randall, he's on the cover of the wine dressed up as a ranger. With
The rest was history at
yeah,
that point.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so there was a little while before the Rhone Rangers organization kind of formed into something kind of resembling what it is now. Um, but you were involved in it really from the very beginning. I mean, the very first Rhone Rangers tasting that I remember going to in probably '01, you were there. Um, the the like, I'm curious, do you like how do you feel about the name Rhone Rangers as it's evolved over time? Do you feel like it still reflects the kind of cowboy spirit of the original founders, or what are your thoughts?
I don't know. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. Um, uh, I mean, it as a catchy name to really get attention, it worked. You know. uh, some people thought it was undignified, of course.
Dignity is
Right,
overrated.
right. And some people felt like, well, it's just too commercial. It's it's crass, or something like that. Whatever works, if you get people's attention and they have a good experience, what's the problem?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, I remember we've had debates. I've been on the board of directors of Rhone Rangers for 15 plus years
Right.
at this point, we've had periodic debates more in the early years than recently as to whether there was like it was time to move on from that into a new name, and like we've never come up with something that we liked as much. And there's always the downsides of starting from scratch with a new name that people don't know. Like so, like you better be sure it's a lot better before you go ahead and change it.
Well, it's hurt, you know.
Totally.
Great way to shoot yourself in the foot if you're not.
That's a again continuing that Lone Ranger analogy. It's perfect. So over the decades that you've made wine, you've worked with I don't know how many dozens and dozens of growers, and I know they have been all over California at various points. I know in the early 2000s you were working with the Rosette Vineyard down here in Paso.
Right? We got a little bit of fruit from you guys in
Yes, you
04,
did.
which was wonderful. Such a great experience.
A little bit of Roussanne in the what was that like 04, 05 era, something like that.
Yeah.
But it seems like over the last like 15 years or so, you've really focused your kind of sourcing work on the Sierra Foothills. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about what it was about the foothills, or what it is about the foothills that appeals to you as a grape growing area.
So the foothills, and particularly the higher elevation growing areas in the foothills, have a strong attraction uh, because of the moderating influence of elevation in, you know, how the grapes ripen. It wasn't just that it was the foothills, because there's a big drawback to working with grapes foothills if you live in Berkeley. You spend at least 5 hours a day behind the wheel of a car, and the older you get, the more of a problem that is, you know, for but the other thing was that that all of that fruit was being managed and farmed by Ron Mansfield and then his son Chuck. And very dear to me. He was really a great friend. Um, and we had such experiences together. Um, he he needed me and I needed him, and it was you know, it was, I think, meant to be. Um, and he he grew some fruit that made some really really good wine. The elevations we were at were between like 2,800 feet and 3,400 feet. Um, and really, when we began working with Gamay, we planted Gamay there in 2000. Um, interestingly, both crews called Valreas, Roman, and grew Syrah, Grenache, and Gamay. And
Did you decide that Rhone varieties were at this point like at least slightly known, and that was making things too easy, so you needed to move to something even more obscure for California?
well, no, I just had a real fondness for Beaujolais, and I knew that nobody had planted any real Gamay in any kind of an intentional way. And Ron and I actually, in 1999, we were on our way down to Paso, and we visited Tablas in that visit, along with Alban and a whole bunch of people. And on the way down, Ron was describing this place up high in Camino that had been a pear orchard, and you know, because of the forces of global whatever, the market for pears and tree fruit was really tanking. So the guy wanted to see if he could plant some grapes. And this was something that happened with Ron and me over the years, many, many times, where he would have somebody that decided he wanted to put grapes on his property because he thought he could make more money. And Ron would come to me and say, I want to take you out to this place and have you take a look at it and help me think about what we ought to plant there. And he knew that I would be really interested, possibly in getting some fruit from that, because I had a very strong impulsive streak. Uh, the time when I was working with grapes from Sonoma, which started out with Durrell Vineyard and became also Parmalee Hill,
Right.
and at the same time was working with fruit from Ron up in the foothills, and then started working with fruit from Rosette and also from Bassetti out near the coast. Um, it was like the world's greatest juggling act, just trying to, you know, time everything so that I could actually get the fruit when it was ripe and manage all the driving back and forth between all these different places, the number of times you have to do it in order to make a good picking decision.
Yeah.
And part of why everything ended up being up foothills at a certain point was I was worn out,
Yeah, I
from all
bet.
that. And I had been too impulsive. I made too much white Rhone, uh, uh, not necessarily from the place that I thought it would do the best. Not necessarily farmed particularly well. Things kind of went to hell at Rosette because they had some with ground squirrels, and the vines were getting really ruined, and the fruit was just had started out so promising, and then a couple of years later it was like, oh
Right.
my God. So and we just kind of we cut way back in 2006. Uh, so we were working really only with foothill grapes, and really only from places that Ron was managing.
It must
Um,
have made your life so much easier, in addition to getting a chance to like work with somebody who you trusted so implicitly.
a little bit late, about 2000, some fruit in Hillsburg, um, and it was dynamically and started oxen growth. We went back to use after years. No team. So then you know I just about shake
Yeah.
was very accommodating, and we started making a from her with such so great.
Um,
Um,
we are. So I don't know if you hear some noise in the background. We have our vineyard guys decided to do one last weeding pass through the closest block to our patio. So I apologize. I apologize if you are hearing the background noise. And I did just hear somebody a comment just came through saying that the audio quality was poor. So I apologize. Anybody who's listening, I apologize for the background noise. I have two. We're almost at half an hour, which is crazy. But I have a couple
mhm.
questions. One, I saw that you announced your retirement earlier this year, um, and I'm wondering, like, are you at peace with that? Do you feel like that's like it was time? You have made your statements that you make in wine, or will we see a reunion tour with collabs with the next great pop star?
There were a number of things that took place. I actually never consciously made a decision to announce my retirement. But Esther Mobley called me a few months ago and said, "I've heard that you've retired. I want to write about that."
I guess I'm
So
retired.
yeah, so I mean, it made it sound like I had really made an announcement, and I really, but I think people knew that I had not made wine for a couple of years. I had I had surgery for cancer in 22, and it was in May, and I just wasn't sure that I felt physically ready for the demands of harvest that soon. And fell and broke hip.
Sorry, I'm moving
Or,
inside so that it's not quite so loud.
right. Let me.
Okay, we're going to try this. This feels a lot more peaceful, and we'll finish from here. Okay, please go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. So I felt like I could be away from Cornelia for more than maybe at a time, and I would never be able to do a harvest that way. And so the decision kind of made itself. Um, and after a couple of years, with a modest amount of sales, because we didn't have that much wine left to sell, um, and all of the worries about all the other stuff that I needed to be able to take care of, it just didn't pencil out to try and move forward at that point.
Um, one of the I I absolutely get it. It makes a ton of sense, and one of the cool things that I get to do as one of the board members of the Rhone Rangers is I got to reach out to you to let you know that you were chosen as this year's Lifetime Achievement Award winner. I know how much that meant to my dad when he got it back 6 or 8 years ago. And I just wanted to ask you to share kind of what that felt like and what your thoughts are at this point.
I was really thrilled when you called and when you told me that. Uh, the 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 that have been really important to me have had more to do with the actual practice of making wine and spending the time in the vineyard, spending the time with the people that I needed to spend time with to do what I've done, and uh, all the connections that I have in so many different arenas that all fed into making Edmunds St. John work. Um, the award is gravy, and I'm very appreciative. But it's one of my other hats that I wear. I'm a musician and a songwriter, and it's the writing of the songs and the singing of them that means everything to me, and the rest of it is no big deal. You know.
That's a lovely analogy. Well, anybody who is in or near or feels like getting to Sonoma and would like to be a part of the celebration of your award, there's going to be two events. I think they're the 28th and the 29th of June. There's a dinner with Girl and the Fig, which is when we're going to be presenting the Lifetime Achievement Award. And all of the wines for the evening have been donated by past winners of the Lifetime Achievement Award. So the wines on the table, I think, are going to be pretty epic.
And
But people who would...
we are actually contributing to that. We have a case of Magnums of 2015 Rocks and Gravel, which I think will be sufficient to go around so everybody gets a taste of it.
That will be wonderful. I have I'm lucky enough to have a few of the older wines that you brought down here at various points when you've come down to visit, and we try not to open them too often because we've only got like 6 or 8 bottles left. But anytime we do, it's lovely. So there's that, and then there's the Rhone Rangers Summer Gala, which is the next day. So that's the Saturday, the 30th in the afternoon. So hopefully anybody who's watching this, who's interested, who wants to come and congratulate Steve or try some amazing wines or both, there's details for that on the Rhone Rangers website, which is rhonerangers.org. So I can't wait to celebrate with you in person in a couple of weeks.
Is Neil there?
I'm sorry?
Neil going to be there?
Unfortunately, no. He will be literally in the air on his way to England. He said that he would send me with some remarks to give on his behalf, but no, he won't be there, unfortunately.
Well, tell him I wish him bon voyage.
Yes, but in English, right? Whatever it is they say in England.
Right.
Amazing. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Cheerio, I think.
Cheerio, exactly. Well, Steve, Edmunds, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It is always a pleasure to get to talk with you, and I hope everybody watching will be excited to come and join us in a couple of weeks because that'll be special too.
All right. Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who has joined, and I'll be back in 2 weeks. My guest in 2 weeks is going to be journalist Felicity Carter, who I think is doing some amazing work in kind of digging into some of the kind of neo-temperance, neo-prohibitionist groups that are starting to have a real influence on health and alcohol policy. So we're going to have a very different sort of conversation in 2 weeks for a different piece of the world of wine. But before then, I'll get to see Steve up in Sonoma, and hope many of you as well. Cheers, everyone.
Adios.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.